Hello and welcome to Fantasy View, a podcast for reviews of fantasy novels. So the secret is out, which it has been for quite some time. Storytellers like to tell their stories in trilogies. Fantasy authors in particular, because they create this entire world, so they figure they should make at least one more book in that world, which then leads to yet another, and so a trilogy is made. So why trilogies? Well, because, just 3 seems to be that magic number. It's not too long, it's not too short. It satisfies without overstaying its welcome. Of course, there are plenty of quadrilogies out there, but no one cares about those. In the fantasy genre, there are plenty of trilogies to choose from. A classic one is the Sword of Shannara trilogy by Terry Brooks. At least I think it's pronounced Shannara. Someone might try to correct me saying it's pronounced Shannara. It's Shannara. Frankly, I don't give a rat's ass. Unless the very author himself wants to correct me, in which case I will happily swallow my pride and then vomit it out. I have the whole trilogy in one volume on my Kindle, which is convenient. And actually, you could say that this is a quadrilogy since a prequel was made called The First King of Shannara. But I never read it, and it's not included in this single volume. And besides, the backstory is explained in the first book pretty well. I don't think reading First King first is absolutely necessary. So the first book in the trilogy is The Sword of Shannara, which was first released in 1977. It helped launch the Del Rey publishing brand, and it got a lot of people interested in the fantasy genre well after hippies had gone gaga over The Lord of the Rings. So this means the book must be really, really good, right? Well, actually, I don't really care for it. I can't say it's really bad or anything, but its problems were a real turnoff for me when I first read it. And it's a small miracle I actually managed to get through the entire thing. One thing about this book is that it's heavily influenced by The Lord of the Rings. This makes the book pretty controversial since many readers feel it's nothing more than a ripoff of that classic trilogy. Now, there are characters that are obvious stand-ins of Rings characters. There's a Gandalf stand-in, stand-ins for Frodo and Sam, a Gimli stand-in, 2 Legolas stand-ins. There's even a character that's kind of a mix of Aragorn and Boromir, a self-exiled prince who should be king. Indeed, the parallels between Shannara and Rings can be a little distracting. When I come to a parallel, I can't help but think of another better story I could be reading instead. But that's not to say the book is entirely unoriginal. There are no hobbits, no spiders or orcs, no similar backstory. There are plenty of differences, and whether or not they make the book worth reading for, a Rings fan, that's better left up to the individual reader. My biggest problem with this book is not the Rings similarities. I could hardly care about those. No, my biggest problem is with the presentation. Or maybe it's called the layout. I don't know. This book has some long paragraphs. Seriously, wherever there's no dialogue, Brooks just plows ahead with the narration and hardly takes a break. It's not unusual at all to come across a page which is just a big, perfect block of text. Sure, sometimes there's an indentation for a new paragraph, and sometimes there are 2. But in general, the paragraphs in this book tend to run way too long. Now, I don't know about you, but seeing such long, uninterrupted runs of text makes the book look so unappealing, like it's a real chore to read. Imagine being in an ocean of text, and you have to slog through it because you're afraid you might miss something important if you don't. But your eyes get tired, they lose their place, you feel like you're on information overload, and your brain starts leaking out from your ears. Thanks, Sword of Shannara. Not only that, but this is a really wordy book. I guess the fact that the paragraphs are too long kind of gives that away. But really, there is simply no minimalist writing here. This might be because Brooks was inspired by some of the classics from Arthur Conan Doyle, Robert Louis Stevenson, and Sir Walter Scott. Old-timers like them got paid by the word. So they made sure to include a lot of words in their stories. And so it's not just the paragraphs, but the sentences in Sword of Shannara that seem to go on and on and on. I swear, reading this book sometimes is like reading a legal paper. Hey! Terry Brooks was attending law school while writing this book. Coincidence? I think not. So, a little about the story. While Rings took its time building up to the main conflict, Shannara wastes little. Our Gandalf stand-in is named Alanon, who is the last of the Druids. That basically means that if he were to go to Salt Lake City, he'd get eaten alive. Right away, Alanon proves that he's a no-nonsense type of guy who wouldn't give a rat's ass if someone was having his 11th birthday or not. He comes to the Shady Vale, that's actually the name of the place, in order to see a half-human, half-elf named Shea. He tells Shea that whether he believes it or not, he, Shea, is descended from the first king of Shannara. So only he can take up the magical MacGuffin, the Sword of Shannara, and use it to defeat the insidious Sauron stand-in, the Warlock Lord. Okay, so we have our main villain, the Warlock Lord, residing in a place called the Skull Kingdom. And he actually resides within a mountain that resembles a skull. So you can totally expect He-Man and the Masters of the Universe to pop up anytime soon. Of course, the Warlock Lord has an army of minions. And they're not orcs, they're something else. Now, I want you to guess what exactly these minions are. And please, just try to guess, just for fun. If you don't know the answer already, I'll bet you will not guess correctly in a million years. And here's a small hint. They're not orcs, and they're not humans. Okay, did you guess? If you chose ogres, wrong. A nice guess, but wrong. If you chose zombies, you've been watching too much of The Walking Dead. If you chose mermaids, then the Warlock Lord must be the sexiest overlord in all of fantasy. But you're still wrong. Okay, the minions of this story are gnomes. Freaking gnomes. I mean, I don't want to bash this choice too much because I respect its originality, but still, having gnomes for minions, it seems like a strange choice to me. Now, usually when you think gnomes, you think of little versions of Santa Claus that make all these crazy inventions, and they stockpile loads of gold only to save it away for a rainy day. But in the world of Shannara, gnomes are little tribal people who are very superstitious. Their biggest defining physical trait is their yellow skin. So now you know where the minions of Despicable Me are from. Anyway, Shea and his adoptive brother Flick are told by Alanon that they must leave the Shady Vale because there are these ring wraith stand-ins called Skull Bearers looking for them. Shea and Flick ignore his warning, but once the Skull Bearer comes by, they get their asses out of Dodge and meet a friend of theirs named Menyen Leia. Menyen happens to be a prince of a nearby kingdom called, you'll never guess, Leia. This guy, Menyen, he just had to be a prince. He couldn't just be a very skilled warrior or something. Oh no, he has to be royalty. I mean, I know that a lot of high fantasy stories like this have characters that are royalty. It's because, when big world-threatening events happen, of course, royalty have to get involved, because if not, then they're not fulfilling their purpose. Even so, how come Flick and Shea, who you remember, only recently learned that he was descended from a king, just so happened to know a prince, who, just so happens to like leaving his castle in order to seek adventure? I think Brooks was like, he has to be a prince because in all the best stories, the heroes are princes, and I want this to be among the very best stories. And so I must have a brave prince in here somewhere. It's destiny! Shea, Flick, and Menyen. They sound like names from Star Wars, don't they? must go to Leia, so they start to cross a bog. Now here's where the long paragraphs start to really be a problem. If you try reading every single word in this scene, you may understand what it's truly like for our heroes going through this bog. It's an incredibly slow and wearisome and irritating journey just to get to the other side. You'll begin to understand why you could use this book as a doorstop. Long story short, our heroes reach Leia and meet up with Alonon, who then gets together the Fellowship of the Ring, or the Sword of Shannara. Except they don't have the sword, the gnomes do, so our heroes have to go get it from them. Now, this may sound a little strange, but just from reading the introductions to each of the Fellowship members, I can kind of tell that Terry Brooks is a really nice guy, which makes me wonder why he ever wanted to be a lawyer. Just check out this passage. Okay, the two elves were brothers. The elder called Durin, a slim, quiet Westlander, who gave the instant impression to Shea and the ever-present Flick that he was a man to be trusted. The younger brother was Dale, a shy, extremely likable fellow who was several years the junior of Shea. His boyish charm was strangely appealing to the other members of the company, particularly Balinor and Hendel, battle-hardened veterans of so many years of protecting the frontiers of their homelands, who found the youth and fresh outlook on life almost like a second chance for them to regain something that had passed them by years before. Now I'm like, really? His boyish charm was appealing to battle-hardened veterans? Call me full of crap if you want, but this seems like something only a nice guy would write. Not to say that the story is saccharine sweet or anything. Indeed, there's plenty of violence that goes on. But even when he writes about battles and killing, Brooks's nice guy nature just peeps out every now and then. Of course, I can't go through the entire bloody story, but let me say that while I was skimming through this book, often skipping entire paragraphs, I was surprised by how much I had forgotten. Some journeys through magical places and a scene where Alonon summons a ghost just didn't stay in my memory very well. It was mostly the ending that I remembered, particularly a large battle between an alliance of humans versus the army of gnomes and trolls. I remembered just how bad this entire sequence was and how it threatened to put me to sleep. I'm sure many listeners out there will wonder what the big deal is. I mean, a high-pitched battle sounds pretty awesome, doesn't it? It sounds like thrilling, white-knuckle excitement. Oh, if only it was. If only it was. The problem is, as I mentioned before, with the presentation. First of all, our heroes spend pages and pages simply planning out the battle. So essentially, the narrator doesn't say what does happen, but simply what could happen for several pages that just seem to drag. And when the battle actually happens, the story still drags on, thanks to how the battle is described. Essentially, the descriptions go like this. This body of soldiers went to this place, and then this body of soldiers went to this place, and then this body of enemies went here, and a group of soldiers formed a kind of wedge and slammed into the enemies like a hammer on an anvil. And then this body of enemies went to here, and there, and here. Ag! I'm like, what am I reading here? A high-pitched battle or an analysis of geometric shapes? Now, the battle's only saving grace is that sometimes it gets personal, like when one or more of our heroes fights the enemy firsthand. The entire sequence is not without passion, but it goes on for too long. There were too many descriptions about, like, the lay of the land, and in spite of the details, I found it hard to picture what all was going on. Perhaps if the author had made the sequence more personal and less academic, the battle would have been more exciting to read. Instead, it left a bad impression on me that lingered well after I had finished the story. In spite of all this, the story itself isn't all that bad. I liked how Shea had defeated the Warlock Lord with the sword, doing so in a manner that you might not expect. And I actually like a part where Menion Leia, the prince who did not have to be a prince, rescues the princess of an island nation. And you can tell there's something going on between them. And it's believable, since there's a war going on, so, tomorrow is always uncertain. And I like how Flick goes into enemy territory, and no, he doesn't do it with Shea. Shea ends up with another companion who follows him to the Warlock Lord, meaning that Flick is not entirely a stand-in for Samwise Gamgee. But you knew there was a but coming, didn't you? I just don't really care for this book. Whatever it does, The Lord of the Rings did it better. The exciting parts are actually boring, and the boring parts are more so, if that makes sense. Some words that come to mind when I think of the Sword of Shannara are overlong and tedious. There's a review on Amazon where the writer says he quit this book after reading for the umpteenth time that a character had a lithe body. And I didn't really mind this so much since I understand the compulsion for an author to repeat certain terms and phrases, but I'll admit that it can be a little off-putting hearing about someone's lithe body. Sounds kind of sexual, doesn't it? Perhaps body types should mostly be left to the reader's imagination. Well, that's it for the Sword of Shannara. I cannot fully recommend it, not even for fans of high fantasy like me, but hey, it's only the first part of the trilogy. Maybe the author can redeem himself by giving a sequel that does away with the problems of the first part. We'll just have to wait and see. Till then, thanks for listening, and please, keep reading.